Hi, I'm Jerry Bowyer. You're listening to Meeting of Minds podcast. My guest is Allison Ball, the Kentucky State Treasurer. This is her second appearance on Meeting of Minds podcast. The first interview was so terrific, we had to bring her back again to talk more about ESG issues. And also, since then, she's gone further in her fight to protect her state's base economy, which is very much focused on fossil fuels. Treasurer Ball, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me back.
All right. So you put out a presser recently. Now, my understanding is you have to follow the law. In other words, as a treasurer, you don't have a super amount of discretion to just do whatever you want. It's a highly defined role, and the law says that you have to you have to serve the interest of those who are retirees, where you're involved with that money, and you also have to serve the economic interest of the state of Kentucky. That's part of the law, right? And there was,
yes, that is correct.
And that was even strengthened more recently with legislation, recently dealing with using ESG to boycott, using ESG as an excuse to debank or boycott fossil fuels. So, what did you do to fulfill this responsibility?
Yes, and actually, there's several requirements for me as treasurer that you kind of referenced. One of them is the fiduciary requirement that I've got under the law, and that's because I'm a board member of our teachers' retirement system, and I sit on our state investment commission. So, as a board member of investments, I have those kinds of fiduciary obligations. But I'm also an executive branch official. I'm an elected to the executive branch, and if you remember from your fourth grade government class, when you were taught about the three branches of government, I have to do what the law says. My job is the enforcement of the law. So last year, the Kentucky State Legislature passed a law that essentially said we're a fossil fuel producing state. It's been a long part of our history. We produce coal, we produce oil and gas. We care about that. And the ESG movement has been encouraging institutions to boycott the fossil fuel industry. And we've been watching this happen. So the state legislature said, if you're going to boycott our fossil fuel industries in Kentucky, then we don't want to do business with you. We don't want to include you in our pensions. It doesn't make sense for us to use taxpayer dollars to hurt our own state. We don't want to have government contracts with you. So there's an investment aspect to it, and there's also a government contract aspect to it. And I was tasked by the state legislature to identify if there are any financial institutions that are boycotting the fossil fuel industry. And so for several months, my office did a lot of research. We did a lot of reviews of public statements, and we also actually made communications to some financial institutions themselves. We asked them, it looks like you've made some statements indicating that you're boycotting fossil fuels. Can you confirm what you're doing? So we had a back and forth with several financial institutions. All of that resulted in a list that we published a few weeks ago, earlier this month. So to start the year off, that's what we did. And we identified 11 institutions that under Kentucky law, we felt like were boycotting the fossil fuel industry. So those are on our restricted list in Kentucky. That doesn't mean automatically that we're divesting them, because the first step is to put together a list, then find out, are these in our portfolios to begin with? Do we have any contracts with them? And then once that's done, then these institutions have time to be able to change their mind and no longer boycott fossil fuel. I've had several of them reach out to me already, and I've told them, my happiest outcome of this would be for you all to no longer boycott the fossil fuel industry. I'm not interested in putting institutions on lists. That's not my goal. That doesn't make me feel like I'm satisfied. I would really like to see these institutions no longer boycotting the fossil fuel industry. I would be thrilled if there's no one who qualified for this list. So that's what we're working on now.
So just to be clear, every one of these banks can do business in the state of Kentucky. You're not saying Chase has to shut down all its branch offices, et cetera. You're essentially reacting as a customer, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because
yes.
I've seen some attacks from As You Sow and from some of the other ideological groups that say that this is, even BlackRock said this, that this is an anti-free market move. Now, if you were acting in the role of a regulator, and you were saying that these banks couldn't do business in our state, well, that would be interference in the market. But when you're a customer, you are the market. You're a participant in the market. And a lot of people would not want to do business with an entity that's trying to destroy, or maybe even maybe they don't even know they're trying to destroy, but that is doing something that's bad for the economy of the people they're doing business with.
Absolutely. We are a market participant in this scenario. And I'm a big believer in the free markets. I believe in the market. I believe in letting it work. And in this situation, we are a market participant. We're looking for good investments. We're looking for a good banking relationship. And again, I'm also using the Commonwealth of Kentucky's money. So it doesn't make sense for me to use taxpayer dollars to do something that's going to harm taxpayers. They really wouldn't be pleased with me in my role as if I'm doing something that's harming them and harming our state and harming our economy, harming their retirements. They would not feel like I'm doing my job if that's what I was doing.
Well, you wouldn't be doing your job if that's what you were doing, right?
Right. I agree.
Yeah. And you are doing your job because of what you are doing. Now, the Washington Post didn't like this. There was a piece, it was kind of amazing to me. I mean, I think of the Washington Post as a serious newspaper. I mean, at least I used to. And they did an article kind of attacking you for this. And the argument seemed to be that, well, you said almost 8% of the jobs in Kentucky are related to fossil fuels. 7.8%. I'm going to round up a little bit. Almost 8%. And their answer was, well, that's only if you count cars. Well, why wouldn't you count cars? I mean,
yes, that is part of the fossil fuel industry. Heavy reliance on gasoline, heavy reliance on oil. No, I agree. So I remember when I was in high school, I took a logic class, and one of the things we learned the different logical fallacies. And one logical fallacy is to respond to someone's argument by not attacking the argument, but attacking something about the person. So that's what this article did. This article didn't address the issue of, are there institutions going after the fossil fuel industry? Is that bad? What they said was, well, you're not really a fossil fuel producing state, so this doesn't matter. That was their argument.
Right.
Which it's, if you're from Kentucky, number one, it's a logical fallacy, but number two, if you're from Kentucky, everybody in Kentucky would identify us as a fossil fuel producing state. We're a small state. We don't have a big economy. And those are still signature industries. And the article said, well, yeah, but you're doing less than you used to. That is correct. We are doing less than we used to.
And that's the problem.
We want to do less.
Right. We want to do more.
We would like to do more. I'm from Eastern Kentucky. I'm from the coal fields. I'm actually from the region that also produces the oil and gas for the most part in Kentucky. So I really know what Kentuckians think about these industries and how they impact economies and livelihoods. I know, and I know the people in my region. I testified for this bill, and I testified before the Energy Committee, and most people on that committee are from Eastern or Western Kentucky, and all of them were like, yes, of course, those are signature industries in Kentucky. So Kentuckians know these are signature industries. And many of us lived through the Obama era, and we saw the coal industry targeted in such a way that it put a lot of companies out of business. It wasn't because they weren't profitable. It's because they were being targeted by the government.
Right.
So yes, it is less than it used to be. We would like it to be more. We don't want a premature death.
Well, and you've mentioned one of the fallacies, the classic argumentum ad hominem. So we're classy around here, Latin.
Yes, that's right.
That's one of them. The other is the non sequitur, which is they say something that has nothing to do with the argument. Yes, it's gone down. How is that an argument against what you're doing? The other thing that really struck me as strange is, well, here's another, the fallacy of the law of non-contradiction. These folks, these ESG folks, I look at these proposals all the time till I'm bleary-eyed. They're all pushing something called Scope 1, going on to Scope 2, and then Scope 3 emissions. In other words, they want to count everything. Well, if they want to count everything, then count everything. So what they can't do is say, well, when we're deciding whether we want to divest from you, we're counting not just your fossil fuel usage, but your customers and your supply chain and everything else. But then when you come along and say you're hurting our state, then they say, but cars don't count.
Exactly.
I mean, they'd be in Scope 3. They should count. So if they want a broad definition of fossil fuel usage, then you're using their analytical tools against them, which they don't seem to like.
Yes, no, it was an article that I really felt like the author knew they couldn't in good faith address the actual issue because there are institutions that are boycotting the fossil fuel industry. Right. So what they try to do is muddy the waters and make it confusing for people. Yeah,
another part of that, I just get caught up on base rate fallacy. So we're doing a lot of fallacies today, which is
yes.
that Kentucky produces, it's the 15th in ranking in coal nationwide, and California is, the highest. Well, California is gigantic. Yes. So yes, you're 15th in coal production, but you're 26th in population, which means you are disproportionately a coal state. And I don't understand how someone could publish this without seeing that there's a base rate fallacy going on here. But I guess the idea is I'm seeing a lot of attacks on people like you, red state treasurers, also attorneys general, because it's beginning to sting.
Yes.
These groups have basically been able to march through the institutions and just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, and they've gotten whatever they want. And their premise has always been, we are going to win eventually. So fall in line now. Eventually, coal will be outlawed, and then you'll have stranded assets. Our victory is assured. And so when they start losing, it's not just that they lose those battles, they lose the sense of inevitability. And that kind of was their main selling point.
I think you're exactly right. I think that's a tremendous analysis.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Okay, so there's an issue with these banks. It's not just the energy issue. There is making decisions for non-pecuniary reasons with these financial institutions. Like, for instance, there's a company that sells insurance, and the NRA members bought insurance from that company and in bulk. And they said, well, we no longer want to sell insurance to the NRA. I happen to be talking to that company now. So they're firing customers for what seemed to be political reasons. JP Morgan Chase debanked Sam Brownback. He was on this show. And that seemed to be political, because when I talked to them, they couldn't give me any examples of anyone on the left or the secular side of things who had been debanked. All the examples were conservative Christian groups, especially religious liberty. So this isn't just about energy. This is about making any business decision for reasons other than business reasons.
Right. And from an investment perspective, because that's usually the way I think about it, I've got this fiduciary obligation to make sure I'm investing for the sole interest of the beneficiaries, and also in Kentucky for supporting our economy and industry in Kentucky. So if I'm investing, I want you to be thinking about getting good returns. I don't want you to be thinking about restructuring society. I'm not really interested in restructuring society. I want to make sure my people can retire.
Yes.
That's what I'm thinking about. So from a government standpoint, when it comes to investments, that's really all that we should be doing. Now, I do think you're right. This non-pecuniary interest, it has all kinds of worrying aspects to it. It definitely seems ideological. It's what elitists have decided that they want to see. These are the outcomes that they want. And that's not really consistent with American culture, American history. That's not the way we do things here. So I think that there needs to be a cultural response to it. I think we're seeing that too, that regular people don't like it. And they're responding to banks, and they're responding to their asset managers. And they're saying, like, look, we don't like this. We don't want you using our money to restructure society.
Right. Government policy does that. Right. But
yes,
here's the problem.
The people that you voted for.
Right. Yes. But we didn't vote the right way, Treasurer Ball. We voted the wrong way. So we need to go with some kind of plan B. I've noticed some scare tactics coming from these folks. And by the way, I've never seen this. I've been fighting this thing a long time, tracking ESG, and it's always been very upbeat and very triumphant. And now they're really frustrated and angry. And one of the latest things is they ginned up some research, which again, it doesn't seem to be quite doing the math right, which puts these big numbers out there of this is how much more taxpayers will have to spend. I think 700 million, 800 million. And As You Sow just keeps, every time someone writes an article about that, they just post it again like it's a brand new study, when it's the same study repeated over and over again. And it doesn't prove what it says it's going to prove. That basically, but the premise, the accusation is you're going to have to pay a lot more interest if you're not doing business with these mega banks. What are they missing?
Well, I know the study you're referring to because we heard about it coming out before we knew what it was going to be based on. And I thought, oh, well, I want to see this study because, if there's a problem, I want to know what the problem is. I'm interested in protecting Kentucky's finances. I don't want to make it worse. So I read through the publication and the information that came out on it. And it was a pretty sorry piece of work, really. It would not stand up to scrutiny. And what it did is it did two things. One, it assumed that only big banks could provide the type of financing that were needed. And I think that's inaccurate just to assume, number one, that only big banks can do it. They're the only game in town, and if you can't get them, then you're stuck. But two, that particular study said that all states are the same. All state statutes are the same. If Because it was using Texas as the model, and it was saying, if Texas is going to lose this money, then every state is going to lose this money. And I think there's an argument that Texas may not be going to lose money, because it's not true that you have to use big banks. They're the only ones that can make this work. But in Kentucky, they were trying to say that we were going to have all these problems with our municipal bonds. And that's not going to happen at all in Kentucky, because our statute doesn't apply to municipal bonds. So it's very, very, very poor work, very sad research, because it's not applicable. Obviously, they didn't read the statute in Kentucky.
So you don't have any authority over school districts and the water authority and the sewer authority and all the rest of it. And let's just be clear, that's where almost all the borrowing is going on. I mean, states might occasionally do something like a pension bond at the state level, but think about the things that government builds. They're building roads, bridges, water, sewer, airport, schools. All of that stuff is local. So the vast majority of borrowing is local, and you wouldn't be affected by that.
It's not affected at all. So again, it just shows how ideological this is, because anybody who's going to do any work at all and be honest about it is at least going to read the statutes in the various states. And clearly that didn't happen.
Yeah, and also the market finds its level. I just came back from Texas. I spoke there a couple of days ago. I noticed it's a pretty big state. It's not a tiny little state. They are going to find somebody who is going to come in and say, all right, we will take your municipal bond business and we will not boycott your oil. And the market will respond to this. So they're assuming no market response. They're assuming that these banks are going to go against their interest and lose money, when in fact there's so many other ways they can do it. They can spin off a different division, or they can just kind of go unwoke themselves, or they can be banks that are also pretty large but are non-ideological. There's lots of ways. And also people can just buy munis, right? You can just buy munis in the open market. So there's lots of ways the markets can solve this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Texas is basically a country in and of itself. So like they will, if anybody can find a way, they'll find a way. But I agree with you. The market does respond. And we've already seen this in Kentucky. When financial institutions got wind that our list was about to come out, we had several that contacted us early and said, hey, we don't boycott fossil fuel industries. And if you have any contracts with any banks that do, we would love to do business with you. And these were major players. These were not tiny little banks no one's heard of before, or financial institutions that no one has heard of before. So I do think the market responds. There is money in this area. And if there's money in an area, someone's going to want to make it.
Yeah. And I can tell you, one of the things that I'm noticing, just a very odd little market niche that I'm seeing, is investors, high net worth investors, coming to me saying, can I build a municipal bond portfolio that's only conservative states, that's only red states, or that's only oil states? I mean, investors are starting to say, wait a minute, Portland? No, I think in the long run, they're going to misgovern themselves. I think California's misgoverned. So there seems to be something going on where there's a groundswell of investors. I can't mention names. That's all confidential, but there's a groundswell of investors who would not only would they not avoid you, but they would hone in on your state, precisely because they believe that fossil fuels is a really efficient way to produce energy, and they think you're a good bet, right?
Yeah, I could believe that, and I'm glad to hear it. And that's the market responding.
All right. Just congratulations on what you're doing. Always enjoy talking to you. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you think you'd like to cover?
Jerry, we ran the gambit. I feel like we covered a lot of good stuff, and thank you for the work you're doing, because I have noticed that there's been an uptick in people understanding this issue and caring about this issue. I know a poll came out recently that showed that the majority of people don't want their retirements to be invested in ESG investment programs. So regular people care about this, and that's largely in part of people like you making sure everybody understands it.
Well, I think the tide turned last year. BlackRock Energy and divesting energy so that Russia produces it, treating abortion, treating pro-life laws like they're risk factors. The mask slipped, And I don't think that anyone who's not in the industry, in the ESG industry, I don't mean the financial industry. I mean, in specifically, they're selling ESG. I don't think anyone thinks of it as risk management anymore. It's politics. And what's odd is these groups are lashing out at people like you, saying that you're politicizing a process. No, you're responding to a politicized process.
Exactly.
And that's what you should do, because finance shouldn't be politicized.
I agree. Thank you very much, Jerry.
So thanks for your service. Appreciate it very much. That's Treasurer Allison Ball from Kentucky. You've been listening to Meeting of Minds podcast, and I'm Jerry Bowyer.